But it wasn't the end of the shift, because from that point on, they stopped pretending this was just a friendly relationship. Over the next week, I started getting more communication. Not aggressive, not directly confrontational, but persistent. Emails asking for temporary access across a small portion of my land. Requests to coordinate usage of areas near the shoreline. Even a suggestion, carefully worded, that it might be beneficial for both sides to formalize certain understandings moving forward. They were probing, testing boundaries, trying to see how much they could get before they had to ask for more. I declined everything, politely, briefly, no explanations, because explanations open doors. And I wasn't opening anything. That's when they pushed harder. One afternoon, I arrived to find 2 trucks parked near the boundary again. This time, workers were unloading equipment closer to my side than they had before. Not fully crossing, but close enough to send a message. I walked over. One of the supervisors noticed me and stepped forward. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "You're getting close." He glanced around, then back at me. "We've got clearance for this section," he replied. "From who?" I asked. He hesitated. "The HOA," he said. I nodded slowly. "They don't own this side," I said. He didn't argue, because he didn't need to. He wasn't the one making decisions. He was just following instructions. "Let me make a call," he said, stepping back. I didn't stop him. I just stood there, watching. A few minutes later, his phone conversation ended, and the workers started pulling back, just a few feet, just enough to technically stay within their boundary. But the message was clear. They were getting impatient. That same evening, my attorney called. "They reached out," he said. I wasn't surprised. "What do they want?" I asked. "Discussion," he replied. "They're asking if you'd be open to a formal agreement regarding shoreline access." There it was. Not a request anymore. A move. And I asked. I told them I need to speak with you first. I took a slow breath, considering it. "They're feeling it," I said. "Feeling what?" he asked. "Pressure," I replied. Because even if they didn't know exactly what the problem was, they knew something wasn't right. You don't build that much, invest that much, without eventually checking every angle. And when they started checking, they found resistance. Small at first, but consistent. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I thought about the cabins, about the buyers, about the timelines. How close are they to closing? I asked instead. "Very," he said. "Some deals are already in final stages. Others are right behind." "Perfect. Tell them we're not interested in any agreements right now," I said. There was a pause. "That's going to escalate things," he warned. "I know," I replied, because escalation wasn't a risk anymore. It was part of the plan. The next day, I got another call from Karen. No introduction this time. "We need to resolve this," she said immediately. "Resolve what?" I asked. "The uncertainty," she replied. "Your position on shoreline access is unclear." I almost smiled. "It's not unclear," I said. "I just haven't said anything." "That's exactly the problem," she snapped, then quickly regained control of her tone. "We have active transactions in progress. Buyers need assurance." "Then you should have handled that before," I said. Silence. Longer this time. "You're creating unnecessary complications," she said finally. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm just not fixing yours." That hit. I could hear it in the way she didn't respond right away. Because now, for the first time, they were starting to realize something important. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a minor boundary issue. It was a gap. A serious one. And they hadn't closed it. "We're willing to compensate you," she said after a moment. "If that's what this is about." There it was. The first real offer. Too early. Too small. "No," I said. "You haven't even heard the terms," she replied. "I don't need to," I said. Another pause. Tighter now. Controlled but strained. "Then what do you want?" she asked. I looked out toward the lake again. At the finished cabins. At the calm water beyond them. At this point, I said, "Nothing." That was the truth. Because I didn't want a deal. Not yet. What I wanted was timing. And timing was almost perfect. Closing day was coming. Buyers were ready. Contracts were about to lock in. And the one thing they all believed, the one thing everything depended on, still hadn't been secured. As I ended the call, I could feel it clearly now. The shift, the tension, the quiet edge building under everything they were doing. They were close. so close to finishing. And that's exactly where mistakes happen. Because when people think they've already won, they stop looking for what could take it away. I didn't. I was watching everything, waiting, because the next move wouldn't be small. It wouldn't be subtle. It would be final. And once it happened, there would be no pulling it back. By the time the last cabin was finished, everything looked perfect. That was the dangerous part. Fresh paint, clean walkways, glass windows catching the light off the lake like they were designed for it. From a distance, it looked like a finished dream. 14 carefully placed cabins, each one positioned to sell a single idea. Private lakefront living. And people had already bought it. Not just the idea, the contracts, the money, the expectation. I drove out there less frequently now, but every time I did, I could see how close they were to the finish line. Real estate agents were no longer just giving tours. They were finalizing details. Buyers walked through with paperwork in hand, discussing closing timelines instead of possibilities. It was no longer a project. It was a done deal. At least, that's what they thought. My attorney called me 3 days before the first scheduled closing. They've locked in dates, he said. Staggered over a few days, but the first group closes this week. Good, I replied. You keep saying that, he said. But once those deals go through, this gets messy. I know, I said. That's why we're not waiting until after. There was a pause. You're planning to step in before closing, he said. I corrected. Another pause. You want maximum impact? Yes, because timing wasn't just important anymore. It was everything. If I moved too early, they'd adjust, delay closings, renegotiate, find a way to soften the damage. If I moved too late, it would turn into a longer legal fight. Buyers caught in the middle, contracts already signed, money already transferred. But right at closing, that was the moment everything was most fragile. Nothing was fully complete, but everything was committed. They invited us to attend, my attorney said. I raised an eyebrow. Us? They don't know what we know, he replied. To them, it's just a courtesy, a chance to maintain transparency with neighboring landowners. I let out a quiet breath. They want control of the narrative, I said. Exactly. That worked in our favor, because the best place to change a narrative is right in the middle of it. Confirm we'll be there, I said. You're sure? He asked. Yes. All right, he replied. Then we need to prepare everything. That part had already started. Over the past week, we had gathered every document tied to the easement. Original filings, verified records, updated legal interpretations. Not just enough to prove it existed, but enough to enforce it. Because there's a difference. Plenty of people have rights they can't use. I wasn't one of them. We should also discuss how far you want to push this, my attorney added. I leaned back slightly, thinking. Explain, I said. There are levels to this, he continued. At minimum, we can force acknowledgement, make it clear that any shoreline access requires your approval moving forward. And the other levels? He didn't hesitate. We can challenge their entire positioning of those cabins as lakefront properties, he said, which would immediately affect value, contracts, and potentially trigger legal exposure for misrepresentation. That wasn't news, but hearing it laid out like that made it sharper, more defined. And beyond that, I asked. He exhaled slowly. You could restrict access entirely, he said, at least until terms are negotiated. That would effectively freeze their ability to deliver what they sold. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at nothing in particular, just thinking, because this wasn't just about proving a point anymore. This was about control. And once you use that kind of leverage, you don't get to take it back. What would you do? I asked. There was a brief silence on the line. Professionally, he said. Yes. I'd apply pressure, he replied. Enough to force them into a deal that benefits you significantly. But I wouldn't go nuclear unless they push back. I nodded slowly. That was the logical move. Measured, controlled, profitable. But logic wasn't the only factor here. I thought back to that first meeting, to Karen's tone, to the way they approached the land like it was already theirs to influence. And more importantly, to the way they built 14 cabins without ever confirming the one thing that mattered most. That's the problem, I said quietly. What is, he asked. They didn't push back, I replied. They didn't check. They didn't ask. I turned slightly, focusing again. They assumed. And now, he asked. Now they're too far in, I said. That was the truth. This wasn't a small oversight. It was a structural flaw in their entire plan. And they built everything on top of it. We'll present everything clearly, I continued. No threats. No escalation unless they force it. That's fair, he said. But we're not holding anything back either, I added. Understood. We finalized the details over the next hour. What documents to bring. How to introduce the easement. When to step in. It had to be precise. No hesitation. No confusion. Because moments like that don't give you second chances. The next day, I went out to the property one last time before closing. Not to check anything. Not to monitor progress. Just to stand there. I walked the same path I had taken weeks ago, stopping at the exact point where that narrow strip of land met the shoreline. It looked the same. Quiet. Unimpressive. Easy to overlook. And yet, it controlled everything. Across the boundary, the cabins stood complete now. Lights on inside some of them. Movement, buyers, agents, final walkthroughs. Everything ready. Everything waiting. I stood there for a long moment, taking it in. Because this was the last time it would look like this. Calm. Unchallenged. Certain. After tomorrow, that certainty would be gone. Not slowly. Not over time. All at once. My phone buzzed. Everything's set, my attorney said. Good, I replied. Tomorrow morning, he added. First closing starts at 10. I glanced once more at the water, at the reflection of the cabins stretching across it. I'll be there, I said. And as I turned to leave, one thought stayed clear in my mind. They believed they were about to finish something. They believed this was the end. But in reality, they were walking straight into the only moment that mattered. Because closing day wasn't the end of their project. It was the beginning of their problem. Closing day felt calm. That was the first thing I noticed. No tension in the air. No signs of concern. Just a steady rhythm of movement. Cars pulling in, doors opening, people stepping out dressed like they were about to finalize something important. Because they were. Just not in the way they thought. I arrived a few minutes early. The main cabin, the one they were using as a temporary office, was already active. Inside, I could see a table set up with documents neatly arranged, folders stacked in clean rows, a few people seated and talking in low, confident tones. Buyers, agents, and at the center of it all, Karen. She looked exactly the same as the first day I met her. Composed, controlled, smiling just enough to keep everything running smoothly. From the outside, nothing had changed, which meant everything was about to. My attorney stepped out of his car beside me, holding a slim folder in one hand. Still time to do this quietly, he said under his breath. I glanced at him. If I wanted quiet, I said, we wouldn't be here. He gave a small nod. Then let's be precise. We walked in together. The conversation inside didn't stop, but it shifted. Not noticeably to anyone who wasn't paying attention, but I saw it. A slight hesitation. A quick glance. The kind of reaction people have when something unexpected enters a controlled space. Karen noticed us immediately. Of course she did. Her smile didn't disappear, but it tightened just slightly as she stepped away from the table and walked toward us. I didn't expect you to come, she said. You invited us, I replied. A brief pause. Yes, she said. As a courtesy, I gave a small nod. That's why we're here. Behind her, I could see the buyers, two couples, both dressed like they were ready to sign. Relaxed, maybe even a little excited. One of them was flipping through a document, stopping occasionally to ask the agent a question. They had no idea. Not yet. Karen followed my line of sight for a moment, then turned back to me. We're in the middle of finalizing things, she said. If there's something you need, we can schedule a time later. No need, I said. This won't take long. That was enough to shift the tone. Not dramatically, but enough. Her posture straightened just a fraction. What is this about? She asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped past her slightly, just enough to address the room. Before anything gets signed, I said calmly, there's something everyone here needs to be aware of. The agent at the table looked up first, then the buyers. Then the silence started to settle in. Karen stepped closer. This isn't the time, she said quietly. It is, I replied. My attorney moved beside me, opening the folder and pulling out a set of documents. Clean copies. Clear highlights. Nothing complicated. Just facts. There's an active shoreline easement tied to the adjacent property, he said, his voice steady and professional. Legally recorded, fully enforceable, and directly affecting the section of land these cabins are built around. The room didn't react immediately, because people don't process something like that in 1 second. They need a moment. And then, it hits. What does that mean? One of the buyers asked, looking between us and the agent. Karen stepped forward quickly. It doesn't change anything, she said. This is just a technical detail. It changes access, my attorney said, cutting in smoothly. That stopped her. Not because of the interruption, but because of what he said. Access how? The buyer pressed. I stepped forward slightly now. Those cabins were marketed as Lakefront, I said, with direct shoreline access. They nodded. That access, I continued, runs through land I own. And under the easement attached to it, I have the legal right to control how that access is used. The words settled in slowly. You could see it happening. Confusion first, then realization, then something heavier. You're saying we don't have access to the lake? The second buyer asked. I'm saying, I replied evenly, that access isn't automatic. It requires my approval. The room shifted, completely this time. The relaxed energy was gone, replaced by tension, questions, doubt. That's not what we were told, one of them said, turning to the agent. The agent looked at Karen. Karen didn't respond immediately, because now she was calculating, fast, trying to figure out how to contain this. This is being misrepresented, she said finally. The development includes shoreline integration. Integration doesn't override a recorded easement, my attorney said. Again calm, precise, unavoidable. He placed the documents on the table. Everything is here, he added. Public record. Verified. Current. One of the buyers stepped forward and picked up the papers, scanning quickly. I watched his expression change. Subtle at first, then clear. This wasn't disclosed, he said. No one answered, because no one could. Another buyer stepped back slightly, shaking their head. We're not signing anything until this is clarified, they said. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, but final. Because once doubt enters a deal at closing, it doesn't leave. Karen turned to me, then, her composure still intact, but just barely. You should have brought this up earlier, she said quietly. I met her gaze. You should have checked, I replied. That landed harder than anything else. Because it wasn't aggressive. It was true. Around us, the room was no longer focused on closing. It was focused on risk. Agents were flipping through documents again. Buyers were asking questions that didn't have quick answers. And the entire atmosphere had shifted from confidence to uncertainty. My attorney gathered the remaining papers and stepped back. We're available to discuss terms, he said. But until this is resolved, any assumptions about shoreline access are premature. No threats, no raised voices, just reality. I turned to leave, because there was nothing else to say. The moment had already done what it needed to do. As I reached the door, I paused briefly, just long enough to look back. 14 cabins. Finished. Ready. And suddenly, uncertain. Then I walked out, because closing day wasn't theirs anymore. Not after that. Now, it belonged to me. The impact was immediate. By the end of that day, chaos had quietly settled over the HOA offices. Not loud chaos, not dramatic shouting matches, but the kind of confusion that spreads under confident smiles. Contracts that seemed ready to sign suddenly sat on tables. Buyers, once eager, were now hesitant, rereading documents, comparing property lines, questioning promises they had been told were guaranteed. Karen Whitfield's smile was still there, but it was tight, controlled, the kind that hides irritation, panic, and calculation all at once. I could see it even from a distance as she gathered her board members for a huddle. Their meticulous control, built over years, suddenly felt fragile. I didn't need to be aggressive. I didn't need threats. I had let reality speak for itself. The shoreline easement wasn't just a legal technicality, it was leverage. And leverage, applied at the right moment, changes everything. The buyer started asking the hard questions. What does this mean for our purchase? One asked nervously. How will this affect our access? Another demanded. Agents, who had been so confident moments ago, scrambled to answer, fumbling through legal jargon, realizing they had never actually confirmed the easement before marketing the cabins. They looked to Karen for guidance. She had none. My attorney, standing by my side, explained everything calmly, referencing each document, highlighting every clause that confirmed my rights. The room grew quiet as the weight of the situation sank in. People finally understood. These cabins, marketed as lakefront properties, were built with a false assumption. Access to the shoreline wasn't theirs automatically, it depended on me. The shift was subtle but absolute. Contracts couldn't move forward without acknowledging the easement. The HOA, for all its planning, all its control, had overlooked the simplest fact. They didn't own what they thought they did. Karen approached me afterward, trying to regain composure. This doesn't need to get out of hand, she said. I agree, I replied calmly. It just needs to be accurate. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She was calculating, negotiating internally, determining how to save the situation without losing face. But the power had already shifted. The moment of leverage was mine. Over the next few days, discussions were held. My attorney negotiated terms that were favorable, not just for me, but in a way that ensured the HOA and the buyers recognized the easement and my control over access moving forward. The HOA had no choice but to comply. Every legal document had been double-checked, every claim I made backed by decades-old records. There was no room for dispute. The cabins? They remained on the shore, but the exclusive lakefront access promise now came with a condition: acknowledgement of my easement. For some buyers, this changed everything. Some opted out entirely. Others renegotiated, adjusting expectations, understanding the new reality. For me, it wasn't about destroying the HOA. It wasn't about causing chaos. It was about respect, legal, rightful, and absolute. They had built their plan on an assumption. I didn't need to destroy them. I simply had to reveal the truth. The satisfaction wasn't immediate excitement. It was quiet, deliberate, a sense of justice and strategy working perfectly in tandem. Sitting on my property that evening, looking at the lake, I realized how much control is a matter of timing. Knowing when to act and when to wait can be more powerful than any confrontation. Karen eventually reached out formally, offering to work with me to ensure future developments were aware of the easement. I agreed on my terms. Every new plan, every potential adjustment required my acknowledgement. The HOA had learned, the buyers had learned, and most importantly, the integrity of my land and rights were secure. Walking along the shoreline that had been my secret leverage for so long, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. These 1,500 acres had been quiet, overlooked, underestimated, but at the perfect moment they proved their value. The cabins, the contracts, the buyers, they were all a lesson in assumptions. Assumptions can give confidence, but unchecked assumptions can create vulnerability. The HOA learned this the hard way, and I didn't need to fight aggressively. I just needed to be patient, observant, and precise. As the sun set over the lake, the reflection of the cabins shimmered across the water. They looked beautiful, perfect even, but now, everything beneath the surface had changed. What appeared to be a straightforward development was now a controlled ecosystem, one where I had the final word. And the best part? No one could deny it. I had waited. I had watched. I had acted at exactly the right moment. And because of that, the property and its shoreline remained mine, respected, and legally protected. That evening, I stood on the dock at the edge of the water, breathing in the quiet and the freedom of knowing the easement was secure. I thought back to the day I first walked this property, to the narrow strip of land that most people overlooked, to the survey lines, the documents, and the patience required. Every step had mattered. Every decision had counted. And now, after months of observation, strategy, and timing, the result was undeniable. I had turned a quiet piece of overlooked land into the decisive factor in a multi-million-dollar development. The HOA had built 14 lakefront cabins without considering who truly controlled the shoreline. And by waiting until closing day, I had revealed the one fact that changed everything. From the outside, it looked like just another development on a lake. But from my perspective, it was a masterclass in patience, strategy, and leverage. The HOA learned the hard way that ownership and rights are not just about documents. They are about awareness, timing, and execution. And as the stars began to appear above the lake, I smiled. Because sometimes, the quietest owner wields the loudest power. The shoreline and the lesson it represented was mine, and no one would forget it.